And this is a really important program for us, is the Housing Festival, not least because we recognise, as we are seeing the increase in engagement with modern methods of construction, that there's an importance of how we prepare that construction supply chain to really engage with MMC. So particularly thinking about SMEs, are they going to be ready and equipped? We've seen this in Bristol, the projects that we've been working on in Bristol. There's this kind of thinking at the moment around MMC being one side of the coin and traditional build being the other side. But increasingly, we know that a lot of those skills that are currently deployed on traditional build, we need to transition them and bring that supply chain into understanding and engaging as a workforce with modern methods of construction. So I'm thrilled that you've been able to join us today. We are going to be recording this event. So if you don't want to be seen, if you don't want to be visible, then please feel free to turn your cameras off and mute yourselves. But we are going to run through this session today with an opportunity for Q&A. And then at the end of that, we'll also have an ongoing session for networking as well. So you're really welcome to stay around and do some networking, because we think that's a really critical part of how we engage and build that understanding and a shared vision across what MMC can be for our city and actually indeed our country. So without further ado, I'm keen that we get into the meat of this event. So I'm just going to take a chance to introduce our speakers today. So I'm going to take them in order that they're going to be presenting on. So first of all, Sally, could I ask you to introduce yourself? That'd be great.
Yes, thanks, Jez. Hi, I'm Sally Gilbert. I'm the Development Director for Brighter Places, formerly United Communities, and I'm saying that because that's under the name in which we built the scheme we're going to share with you. We're a housing association based in Bristol, and our development programme is very much centred in Bristol. And it's great to have the opportunity to come and show off our MMC scheme.
Great, thank you, Sally. And over to Nigel. Or has he dropped out again? He's had a few microphone problems, so we'll come back to Nigel. I'm going to hand instead then over to Heather Rees.
Hi, I'm Heather. I'm an architect and associate at AWW, and we've been working with Bristol City Council and Tempo Housing to deliver a scheme in South Bristol, which we'll be talking about today.
Great, thank you, Heather. And certainly last but not least, over to John O'Brien.
Hi, I'm John. I've been working with Tempo Housing to bring their product to market. And also we've been working with Bristol on the Innovate UK project for the last 18 months, which were finished in September. So that was a real learning curve about how do we bring people into the whole MMC world. So look forward to having a chat today.
Great, thank you, John. And I'm hoping that we'll be joined shortly by Nigel Dyke as well, who's just had a few microphone problems. So we'll continue and we'll drop him back in when he can join us. But just to say as well about this workforce of the future, and this is an important part, that this is part of a broader training and skills opportunity as well. So there's going to be other opportunities to engage with, ways of engaging with MMC, being skilled up, trained up. There's part of a broader package that this workforce of the programme, Workforce of the Future programme is operating. And in particular, my colleague Jessie Carter will put up a link here. There's an important event taking place at Ashton Court at 4 p.m. On the 10th of February. So that's Thursday, 10th of February. So there we're going to be presenting a lot more about practical ways, practical training opportunities, practical funding opportunities that will be available to you through this broader Workforce of the Future programme, and indeed other programmes that WECA are funding in the region. So we'll put a link in the chat. Please do take a look at that. That's a chance to meet in person, which some of us are craving to do after quite a long time of sort of doing too many of these Zoom calls. So if you'd like to come and join us for a drink, hear a bit more about the training on offer, particularly around engagement into MMCs, then we'd love to see you on Thursday, the 10th of February at Ashton Court. So let's move on, because you've already had enough from me. And we've got a lot of experience, real work experience with the sort of the highs and lows and the journey of innovation that we're going through in MMC as we deliver more of this in our city. And in that case, I'm really delighted to welcome back a good friend and a colleague, someone who worked with over the years. Sally, over to you.
Thank you. I've noticed that Nigel has sorted himself out. So do you want to introduce
everyone,
yourself,
that lovely moment of this new world.
We've just
Nigel, would you like to just quickly, Sally, if that's kind. Nigel, would you like to just introduce yourself, and then and then we'll go straight to you, Sally.
Apologies, everyone. It's as I say, it's our new world, isn't it? Where you are at the hands of the gods of IT. My name's Nigel Dyke. I'm a director of Alec French Architects, and we're involved with the LaunchPad project, which obviously Sally will talk about shortly, as well as being, I'd like to think, great supporters of the Bristol Housing Festival over the years and all the work that Jez and the team in particular have been doing. So it's great to be here. Thank you, Jez. Sally.
Right, thank you. I think we've been asked to keep our intros to our projects to about 5 minutes, so I will aim to do that. As Nigel said, we've been supporters of the Housing Festival and think they're doing a fantastic job in sort of bringing this MMC and all the work behind it and all those initiatives together really in Bristol, so we can really achieve something together. And we were really delighted to be able to embark on our first MMC scheme in, I think it was, I said to Jez, I looked back and it was October 2018. So very much at the beginning of the launch of the Housing Festival. BCC provided the land to us. It's a car park in Fish Ponds, for those of you who know Bristol well, on a 10-year lease. Nigel and his team provided the design expertise, and Integra, who are manufacturers of site cabins, but had done some work with schools and other facilities in making more sort of permanent structures. And Nigel might explain why we went down that route. That was how we delivered. So we ended up with a bespoke product, but sort of having a modern kind of shipping container type look about it. We fancied being kind of contemporary, and you'll see that in a moment. I'm going to show you a very short video so that you can kind of see what it looks like and might shape some questions, etc. But just to say, our vision came initially from the work with the Housing Festival, but also a visit that we made to Holland, and our European partners are, as you know, often way ahead of us in being a bit braver than perhaps we are as a construction industry. And they've done a very interesting initiative to bring different areas of the community together. So theirs was refugees and students, and the idea was to kind of combine those so that the students could support the refugees to integrate into the Dutch society, and ironically the refugees could teach the Dutch students to speak English because they spoke better English, and it worked really well. And it was based on a similar thing that we're doing. We brought different people to because refugees is not our area of expertise. So we brought key workers, young people through 1625 independent people, and then Bristol University students who were in financial hardship. So those three groups together to cohabit, and there was shared space and Land Aid, I believe it was, provided some funding, but I think they funded a community worker to help those three groups come together. And we took a year to build it. So we are now a few years on and it still looks great. And I'll just, if this all works, I'm hoping, just give you a little insight into what it looks like. And then I'll just round up and hand over to Nigel to talk about the design in a bit more detail. I just have to find my, hold on. You don't want to see my screen, you want to see this, I'm hoping. Sorry. I hope that worked and you weren't just all looking at a blank screen. Great. Okay, good.
Definitely worked, Sally. Thank you.
So hopefully that gives you a sense of what we were trying to achieve, a kind of shipping container look. We couldn't actually, shipping containers, we did look at that, but they proved too inflexible. So as I said, we went for a bespoke product, and Nigel was involved with the designers at Integra who came up with the bespoke product. Just a couple of lessons learned, I guess, for me, and this is the next stage that we're looking at, is to have a manufacturer that's closer to us. I mean, I'd love to have a factory in Bristol, but because Integra are based in Hull, and I think Nigel will probably say one of his lessons learned is he would like to have spent more time with the designers, the in-house designers there. We were in a rush. We had to get it done in a year because students were involved. We had to get them into the homes before September. So we didn't have a lot of lead in. And the other requirement for us as an organisation is that we are working with Bristol City Council to extend the lease. We worked on a 10-year lease, and actually we need it to be longer so that we can charge the units and make this a more replicable model. We had to use our own funds plus a very small amount of grant, and Nigel helped us get some grant from Land Aid as well, which was brilliant. But it was tight, but we wanted to do it. We were committed to doing it, but it's taking us that little bit longer to replicate it. So, and yes, it took a year from inception. That's not from starting on site, that is inception. And I think it took us about 6 months to get over that, Nigel, didn't it? It was pretty frantic at the end, I have to say. And there's a question up saying, are the homes classed as temporary buildings? Meanwhile use, yeah, that was a tricky with the planning department. We were looking at residential, but we did end up with doing sui generis, which is a sort of all-encompassing class to be able to get it through planning. But the planners were brilliant, and Bristol really supported us through the process. So that's me. I've probably done far too much talking. I'll hand over to Nigel, who's going to talk a bit more about the design, I think, and some things for architects to.
Thanks, Sally. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? Because quite a lot of, certainly today, quite a lot of these, shall we call MMC projects are quite unique in themselves, but we're obviously also thinking about MMC in a much broader sense of the word. So whilst there were some, there are quite a lot of lessons and opportunities and challenges from LaunchPad, I'm also just going to try and make those sort of general observations about MMC and the range of MMC these days ranges from volumetric to SIPS panels to so on and so forth. And I think it's important that we understand how broad that range is and how increasingly it is increasing in the types of products and techniques that it encompasses. But to me, there are some generalizations about MMC, and that's that it's to do with delivering projects more quickly. It's delivering projects more efficiently in terms of waste and quality. And that's not just because some of it's built in the factory, it's just a nature of that product. And it's also about addressing a long-standing and increasing concern about skills in the industry and in construction industry, and having to bring in skills from other industries to deliver construction projects. And interestingly to me, it's increasingly seen as a way of addressing carbon. in a way that I suspect at the beginning of this journey was never really considered. But most of the manufacturers we talk to are very, very comfortable about talking about carbon and energy use, particularly the likes of Tempo and Tegra and the people that we dealt with. And I think as a profession, we have little choice but to engage with MMC. I mean, I think, it is now the way that new buildings will be increasingly delivered. I mean, to start with the positives, really, I think the lessons from LaunchPad was that there is a really good opportunity to engage with the supply chain very early in the process to make sure that the building or the project you're delivering absolutely maximizes the values, both in terms of speed and cost and all of those sorts of things, that the MMC particular method that you're going down will use. And that was very clear about LaunchPad, where Sally said we'd like to have had more, but we did engage very closely with, in a sense, the experts, so that we were drawing and designing the things that we knew that would end up as the product, shall we say, not just drawing something for planning and then hoping it looks like it when you go through planning. You absolutely engage on it. And I'll come back to that, because that's actually also a challenge. And I think the other thing for me, being slightly selfish, is it's a fantastic opportunity to improve our own personal and practice knowledge about construction and all of those things. And increasingly, there's many more opportunities for training and learning about how MMC can benefit you. And so that whole skills thing about you as an architect or a construction professional, that's definitely an opportunity when you're dealing with these sorts of projects. I also think that the other broad benefit of MMC is they tend to be more collaborative projects, in my experience, because you get the team in early, because actually you understand that you're testing and trying things. It does seem to be a better process than perhaps the old adversarial process that construction was. And certainly LaunchPad, I don't think, could have been delivered in the timescales that we were talking about without a collaborative approach about, no blame culture, what's the problem, how do we solve it across the whole piece. And I don't think that should be underestimated as an opportunity with MMC about broadening the way that we deliver buildings in a much broader sense. But then there are two big challenges, really. And I'm conscious I'm not talking about the detail of LaunchPad, but I think that could come out in some of the question sessions probably better than this. The two big challenges that you have to make early decisions in the process about which product you're using, which system you're using. And actually that goes against quite a lot of current practice with regard to risk and procurement. So Brighter Places, United Communities as they were, for example, made some incredibly bold decisions about placing orders before planning was in position in a way that lots of developers or clients would have been very uncomfortable about. And that is a feature of MMC. It really is you have to design the building to benefit the system to its maximum ability. Otherwise, there's almost no point doing it. And then the other challenge, which I think LaunchPad did throw up quite a lot, was a gap in knowledge with some of the, should we say them, statutory bodies. So whilst Bristol planners were incredibly supportive of the scheme, it was a challenge for them to get their head around what LaunchPad was and what we were doing, and the size of rooms and the benefit of the communal facilities. And there was a lot of conversation, as Sally touched on, about how we get a building through the planning process when it's not normal. And that extended significantly into building control and warranty bodies, whether they're Zurich or Premier Guarantee or all of these people, or even mortgage providers. And it's fair to say that is becoming easier, but it was, getting LaunchPad through building regs was quite a challenge, because we were doing things that didn't fit normally with how it was seen, whether that's air tightness or individual units or the fire strategy from the building. All those things were things that had to be discussed and learned through. So those, I don't think that challenge should be underestimated still. It's getting better. And it's clearly, you know, BOPAS, all of these organizations being addressed, but it's still there as a challenge. So I think those are the main points I want to get across, Jez, if that's okay, in terms of the three big opportunities, which I think are really good, but being aware that there are still some challenges in this emerging market, shall we say, or area of expertise or approach.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel, and thank you, Sally. I think there's some great questions that have come up and we'll pick these up because I think they'll apply the other scheme as well around sort of charging and foundation. So we'll come back to that because I think that Nigel picks up on the point you're making is that, you know, we're seeing great opportunity, we're seeing increased confidence to engage, but there is still this innovation learning and almost institutional confidence that we're seeing built up around the statutory bodies as well. So keep the questions coming in the chat. That's a great way of collecting them. And what we'll do is we'll move now to look at one other developing project, and then we can look at some of those questions across the piece. So I'm delighted now to hand over to Heather Rees, who's going to introduce.
Great.
Over to you, Heather.
Thanks so much, Jez and the Bristol Housing Festival team. I'm just going to share my screen now, so you don't have to look at me. You can look at some pretty pictures instead. Great. So AWW have been working with Bristol City Council and Tempo Housing to develop a small brownfield site in Inns Court for move-on accommodation. So that's for those who've experienced homelessness and are currently living in temporary accommodation. In talking today, I am relating solely to our experience in developing up to stage 3 design for this particular scheme and the opportunities and challenges and lessons learned that we have seen in using volumetric MMC on this project. So our project brief was to provide much needed affordable accommodation whilst respecting the scale and density of the local area, to deliver a highly sustainable scheme aiming at net zero, to proactively engage with the local community and for the scheme to offer a real tangible community benefit, to provide a resilient and durable building, especially given the site location and a visual improvement, and finally for there to be a sense of ownership by the local community. So the current scheme consists of 12 one-bed, 37 square metre studio apartments with external rear amenity space for residents, a pocket park for the local community, and a tree-lined frontage to Marshall's Walk. Each studio is made of 2 volumetric units, and the units are stacked 2 stories with external stair access. There has been a significant amount of early engagement with local residents and also potential users to develop the proposals, and this is an ongoing consultation process. Unlike a traditional build, Tempo as modular provider have been involved from the outset. However, the 3-year on-off involvement in this scheme has resulted in the modules developing quite significantly in this time, rather than us working with a finalised project. As such, we've been involved with the front-end design maybe a lot more in a manner to a traditional build. So we actually started the process with fairly limited parameters from Tempo other than the size of the units and guidance on optimal locations for openings. As such, we were involved in designing the internal layouts as well as ensuring early consideration of compliance with statutory regs. Aesthetically, the benefit of the Tempo system is that the architect can choose from one of their standard cladding systems or specify a preferred A1 rated cladding product instead. As such, it has allowed us to play with the external aesthetic and provide flexibility in responding to local community and planner concerns. Again, very similar to the process of a traditional scheme. So our initial proposals arranged the units in a linear arrangement, as would probably be standard for most volumetric builds. However, through discussions with the council and wider public consultation, we reviewed whether an echelon layout could be delivered to avoid overlooking of adjacent properties and to provide variety to the streetscape. Tempo were able to develop their standard approach to meet this design development. This flexible approach has definitely been to the benefit of the scheme. However, it's worth noting that this might not be achievable with all modular providers, depending on how fixed the modular product design and manufacturing process is. So John's going to speak more about the detail of the units themselves and the sustainability credentials. However, what have we as architects learned through this process to date? So in terms of opportunities, the design process can definitely be quicker if detail of information is readily available. There are real efficiencies in the design process of repetition and duplication, especially if the project's at scale. What we haven't yet realised due to the stage of the scheme is the benefits of reduced length of time on site, particularly helpful to projects with tight programmes and where minimising disruption is critical. However, this has been a huge selling point in public consultation with the neighbours. And we understand there to be a higher realisation of design performance, such as, when we're trying to achieve net zero, that can be more likely to be realised in reality. But what about the challenges? So we've experienced a reduced flexibility to deal with on-site constraints if you're working on the premise that standardisation is key to the efficiency of volumetric. There is a potential reticence to release technical information engaged in the design process if the appointment and therefore payment is subject to contract, but maybe a two-stage appointment could assist with this. And also publicly and industry perception to MMC, but this is rapidly changing thanks to people like Bristol Housing Festival. And just a few other things to consider. Early appointment of the MMC provider is critical to reap the full efficiencies and assist with coordination. It doesn't provide a straightforward cost comparison based on traditional methods of accounting. So how we evaluate costs against a traditional build might have to be considered differently. I think this project has differed from maybe how we perceive the future of volumetric MMC, and that we've been much more involved with the front end design and the subsequent development. But this project has been a learning process for us in understanding MMC better. However, as architects, we can see the real potential of using MMC, especially as some of the processes and policies needed to support this delivery method evolve. Thank you. I'll pass over to John now.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, I'll take you. I'm more about bullet points myself, so let's see what I can share with you. This works. Great. Work. Okay, just going to start off from here. So just following on from Heather, there's some good. Before I come on to design, we just got to say what the challenge is, because one of the reasons we've engaging with Bristol and the Bristol Housing Festival was to sort of tackle the big issues, and they're not going away. So we need millions of homes. We've got fuel poverty escalating. Probably in April, it's going to go crazy. So how are we going to sort of ensure against future cost rises? We've known about it for a long time, but it's now really staring us in the face. We've got a problem with material costs are rising as well. So how do we stop passing that on to our clients, and how can we help tackle some of the problems? We wanted to sort of be future home standard ready. So the challenges in 2025, when the new Part L comes out, are even more ambitious and pushing us towards a zero carbon. I'm not sure how the timetable is going to work, but we know what the targets to achieve are. So we've been working to that. And of course, we've got the skills crisis, as has been mentioned repeatedly. Getting people to do the projects, that's really is the issue. So again, we look towards how do other people do it? How the car industry, how does everyone else approach it? So we're looking at the design for manufacturing assembly, a popular phrase, sort of bandied around a lot. But as we said, DFMA, it's different. Using modern methods of construction, it's a massive step change for contractors, for suppliers, for clients. So we're here to sort of try and ease them through the process as much as possible, and demonstrate the advantages, and be more, we're innovation equals risk. So we're trying to manage the risk here as much as possible. So how do we approach it? Getting in early, obviously, is key. And as Heather mentioned, we were fortunate to be right there early on through the discussions with the development and of the project. And we're also able to adapt our design and actually almost start again with it and say, well, we can do this, but we've absolutely got to standardize things. Otherwise, there's no point having standardization if there's 25 different versions of that standardization. We'll lose all the efficiencies. We also wanted to make sure that people are familiar what the constraints are. You know, if you've got to be honest and say, we can do this, we can't do that. If you want a triangular site, or if you want a curved building, there's better people out there, and we're not afraid to say we're not going to take something on that we're not going to be able to deliver, and that's key to it. So part of the idea of standardizing is saying, this is what we've got, can you make it work? We can help adjust it a bit, but what we can't do is retool the whole production line. Again, what elements do you want? Do you want a finished unit? Do you want it clad? Do you want it with internal finishes done? We can cater for that. We'd rather do a sort of turnkey solution, but we understand that there's going to be constraints on site, and there may be ways of involving more community involvement as well. So we're not just about taking jobs out of the community and put them in a factory. There may be various stages where people are engaging, so we've got to be wary of that as well. And we're also aware that there might be more than one solution needed for a site. So where you've got a mixed scheme, where you've got some high rise, you've got a mix of high rise and residential and commercial, and then you've got some low rise housing as well. So it may be that you need multiple partners on site, but we won't say we can deliver something if we can't deliver it. We've got to be honest in that respect. So our approach is volumetric units, maximum finishing. Warmth and comfort, that should be a given, but we focus on the whole fabric to make sure that, as Sally was mentioning earlier, we've got to minimize those heat losses to start with, so you've got the best platform to start from. And insulation, and that's not just thermal insulation, but acoustic insulation as well. We've got a lot of people living close to each other, maybe in a busy neighborhood already. So we know your health and well-being is about being able to have an element of quiet within your home. And of course, standardization of products. We've got to work with, that's the key to our platform, really. And our focus is on affordable housing. We're not going for the luxury apartments on this one. We're focusing very much on that. And we then add in, we look at the renewables and can we achieve a zero carbon or net generation? Because I think we're getting more people looking at the costs of energy and seeing what can we do to make the whole scheme zero carbon, but also not just for the sake of it, to see how it can contribute back to the community, maybe even provide an income to someone like Bristol Council from the excess energy generated. So our design meets minimum space standards, no question. We're not going to challenge people and trying to go around it. We want to provide that level of comfort again and the right size. We can do that right the way from sort of small flats right up to family homes. Again, insulation again, we have its heat pump ready. We can plug in to either individual heat pumps or maybe a communal heat network. Renewables ready. So again, we can we can trade surplus energy, we can build the tenants, there's all sorts of options available. And of course, it's part M4, it's mobility as standard. Why would you have different levels? So we can, it's already spaced and designed to do that. So as we age, we have an aging population, so we've got to allow the fact that these buildings can be adaptable. And again, how do they arrive on site? Pre-clad or finished? Ground floor pre-clad, upper floor with finishings required. And then we get onto the dull stuff like BIM, which is, for us, is really important as a supplier. We're going to make sure, especially where we're dealing with lots of different suppliers from different countries, there's a common language there. And we need things to turn up correctly sized and not something lost in translation because a drawing was misplaced. It's a good focus for us to keep it part of that. And having had a sort of history in asset management, it'd be really nice to know what you've got as your housing association, your council. You've got a real record of the stock and the asset and the products that gone into it. And we also, of course, that will lead us to look at the life cycle as well. Once you've got that level of accuracy, we can then look at the automation and make sure that the products are linked into that whole DFMA platform. So next up, I should have a nice little system. It just shows how one size of unit was able to be placed on that rather difficult sort of long, narrow site. We were trying to optimize the number of units, and it came together really well. Those are all the same size units, but they managed to link together. They're spliced. They work really well. They're still going to have the right levels of acoustic insulation and comfort. So that's been very successful, I think, as a real outcome of the project. And then there's we like a nice CGI to sort of see the interior. So it'll be great once we've got them built and we got the real thing. But yeah, it just shows there's comfort, there's space as well. You know, it's not pokey. There's a good size in there as well. And again, like the bedroom, with optional cat and sort of good size. Again, a bathroom that can be adapted for use over the life of the building or the occupancy if their circumstances change. So that's a very quick summary of where we're at with Tempo Housing.
Thank you, John. That's great, and thank you to all our speakers for sharing a bit of that journey. And I think what is interesting to me is how that's raised an awful lot of the kind of complexity that when you engage with MMC, you sort of go in through one door and suddenly you have all of these other doors that get sort of opened as opportunities and challenges. So we're going to have a time for Q&A now. I think what I'd say at the beginning of this is that we focused today really on two quite specific schemes because of the challenges that they raise. It's worth saying, of course, in Bristol there are some larger schemes as well, where we're looking at a mix of full volumetric, and again, as Nigel was referring to, other of those MMC solutions, and some of those are for larger schemes, organisations like Booklook on the Brook and LNG Modular. So we're starting to see, again, it's really important, as I think is coming across when Nigel was speaking, that there are different systems, and the challenge is therefore, what is the innovation for? And I just want to pick up on one question straight away. I think that Greg's raised about the issue of procurement, and the question posed in the chat there was, how have you managed to minimize comparison issues across typologies? Because certainly one of the things we recognize is it's difficult at the moment, as Heather was alluding, even on the way that you cost the project, it can be very difficult to get that real comparison. I think it's worth saying I'd love, Sally, perhaps you can answer that, how you made the decision as United Communities, then Brighter Places now, to go down that route of MMC. Certainly, I think it's just worth saying on behalf of the council that we've slightly been able to, because this project has been part of an Innovate UK project, and under the sort of public law threshold, we've used an innovation ability to avoid public procurement for this. It's part of an Innovate UK funded project. But out of that, and Lisa Saunders very helpfully put a link, we have designed exactly that question in mind. How do you get local authorities, housing associations in particular, to really understand and interrogate that MMC market when it's developing at pace? So we spent quite a long time looking at the questions that local authorities would like to compare and contrast. But within that, there's an assumption that there is a belief and understanding and engagement that MMC is a route that people want to go. So making the case for MMC, and these projects are creating that learning and that confidence, are really important. And almost you're sort of saying, well, at the moment, it's difficult just going in neutral. You almost need some desire and commitment to look at MMC. Otherwise, because some of that intelligence isn't yet always available, you can scrabble, as you suggest, Greg, looking at apples and pears. Sally, could you answer from your perspective how you took the jump? Because I think that is important from a sort of strategic perspective.
I think, as I said at the beginning, we're a smaller organisation, so we're able to be, I think the word is agile. We also are only one step away from getting the board to approve such things. So as long as we do a good sales job, then we're more likely than some of the bigger housing associations. And what we're hoping is that our experience can be shared with others to sort of say, it is worth making that leap. I mean, we didn't know this until we completed it, but we were hoping that the quality would be better just because of the nature of, the manufacturing process being in a warm factory, and the quality can be looked at in far more detail in those conditions. And we've proven that in that we had 0 defects. Now, I have not had any construction project. It's 30, I didn't say, I'm not sure if Nigel did, it's 31 homes at LaunchPad. So it's medium size for us. We've got sort of, our biggest one is about 160 standard, traditional construction. We've got another scheme of 50. So 31's not tiny. And to have no defects, that's made a big difference. And actually, people always say that MMC is expensive, but if you factor in the defects issues and all the issues we're having with traditional construction at the moment, every single one of our sites that we're on site with, we've got some challenges with the contractors, and claims and actually costs are going up and up since Brexit, and all of the issues that we've got challenges with. It's closing that gap, and I would say traditional construction is getting very close. Where you then add in the speed, so you're getting the homes into management and earning the rent from them. That's a very positive on MMC. The quality is positive in the sense that it's zero defects, but actually then you're providing a better product for your end user, which obviously we have a commitment to. So now we've built one, it's easy to do the sales job. And in terms of procurement and choosing one, it was difficult, but actually Integra were the only one at the time that had the flexibility to work with Nigel to provide a bespoke product. On number two, we want to go with Integra again because it would waste the lessons learned. So we're likely to do that. But on our third project, I think we would widen that scope. And by that stage, hopefully will have built an MMC factory in Bristol. Who knows? I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's very helpful.
Sorry, Jez, just a very quick observation.
Nigel.
I mean, I think just when Sally's been quite modest, I think the view from me is clients with holistic views is the point. It's very easy to tackle one issue like cost or delivery or whatever, but when you take a holistic view, it's a much more compelling discussion and conversation, would be my only observation. And Brighter Places, United Communities managed to do that, taking that bigger view.
Yeah, we've talked quite a lot about learning what it is to be outcomes led. So when you're commissioning housing, really, as you say, taking the holistic view, what is it that you're trying to achieve, and recognizing that if a system is not delivering those outcomes, you've got to have the courage to think again. And here's what I'd like to do is sort of just sort of lots of comment has been made, particularly I think by the architects, but also by you, John, around this challenge of what we mean by standardization. So a question here, I suppose, when particularly for the architects, because I'm aware that when we think about MMC, for lots of people, the shock is it's not a little tweak. You're looking at resequencing of decision-making and earlier design freeze. You're looking at different procurement. You're looking at different warranties. You're looking at different finance and capital flows. I mean, it's complex stuff. It's all doable, but there's lots of questions that get asked. As an architect, therefore, I'm thinking particularly for Heather and Nigel to comment on this. Are you not worried about that element of standardization on the design and the risk that you're going to lose the ability to really drive beauty and difference into the way you deliver housing? How do you square design standardization versus your passions as architects to create beautiful places? Perhaps you can comment on that tension if it exists.
Heather, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do. I mean, I think we've probably had quite a unique experience in that it feels in many ways that we've had real opportunity to be involved with the front end design and kind of develop a product with Tempo Housing where we've kind of had influence over more of the layout and the aesthetic and so on. But I don't know that they necessarily have to be mutually exclusive, because I think as architects we are increasingly involved with kind of compliance and standardization within the industry generally, and this forms kind of one route, but it doesn't mean that you can't produce beautiful buildings if you're producing something that's more standardized. I suppose it's suggesting that only unique things are beautiful things would be my thoughts anyway.
Yeah. And there's a lovely quote by an architect, well, I'm sure you all know, called Alvaro Aalto, which say the module I use is 1 millimeter. And so that's why all his buildings were like they were in a way. I mean, I actually think putting together buildings, projects are huge jigsaw puzzles, and there are lots of constraints and lots of challenges. And I think standardization can actually be an opportunity at some level, in that there are things that you almost don't have to worry about. So you know what the cladding choices you have, you know what the module is, and that's fine. That can be liberating. I mean, I'm petrified of greenfield sites. I'd much rather be designing in a context with a list of constraints that I understand. And I mean, I don't see it as a threat at all, Jez, actually. I think as long as you understand the rules, and like John indicated, that if you do understand the rules, actually you can tweak them and change them within that rule book. So, you know, the next LaunchPad project, even working with the same supplier, need not look like LaunchPad, as long as you understand those rules.
Yeah, and
John,
I think as architects,
sorry, Heather, go on.
I was just going to say, as architects, I suppose we're always working with a set of rules. It's just maybe a slightly different set of rules. So, we kind of adapt.
No, I think that's helpful. I just was going to ask John to comment from an MMC supply perspective. How do you tackle perhaps that perception that standardization can lead to boring, dull, repetitive delivery?
I look at some of the schemes at the moment that as I drive up the motorway, and I see what are greenfield site developments, and they are boxes on hills, and I see that and think those are dull and repetitive and away from services, and you know, everyone needs a big car to get to and from. So I think what Heather and her sort of architectural practice have designed was quite a challenge with the echelon pattern. We could have kind of run screaming down the road, but actually once we looked at it and said, no, this can be achieved with standardization, with clever engineering. So if you think, well, that's an engineering challenge, and we went so I had a look with the factory and said, no, we can do this, and it won't compromise our coal bridging. You know, our coal bridging is, you know, just completely eliminated. It's an excellent sort of bit of engineering itself. So we didn't want to say, well, we can do a design, but it won't perform as well. We've actually managed to keep the performance levels. So I wouldn't be scared off or say, well, we'll only do boxes and small boxes, bigger boxes, or whatever. We'll take on the challenge, but no curves, please. That could be a nightmare.
Right, I understand. Yeah, and I sort of push a bit more therefore on the resequencing that we see with. And I think, again, you know, Sally, you were talking about the benefit that you experienced, no snagging, and that was fantastic. But it meant you did a lot of work with Nigel, and it will be the same on the Tempo scheme, where that early design freeze means that you're putting a lot more through those RIBA stages, consolidating that much earlier. So what about the risks that you go through where with a traditional build scheme, you often get the benefit that once you get onto site, you can kind of knock it about a bit. You can make changes. You can sort of react quite nimbly to what you discover on site that you didn't know. Isn't there a risk with MMC that because it's all locked down so early that there are still going to be unknowns as you get onto site? And those, how do you keep the cost control? How do you get the assurance that you really know what you're going to deliver, because you are locking that cost and that design in much earlier? Is that a risk that you can mitigate, or is it a risk that you still sort of slightly go with your eyes closed, hoping and crossing all your fingers? And I wonder if, Sally, you can share that, and then perhaps...
No, I mean, actually, I would suggest that because you have to commit, you have to address the risks at an earlier stage, which is what everybody wants. Certainly housing associations, we do all of our traditional schemes are done on a design and build contract. So you are, and for the sole purpose of handing the risk over to the contractor. But the reality is they still push back on so many things and you end up in disputes. But on the LaunchPad scheme, again, saying it was 31 units, I can't remember what the total scheme cost was actually, but we had a final account of £5,000, which again, I've never known. And yes, there were some challenges. I mean, the biggest challenge for us was we let the contracts, all of the contracts separately, and we let the groundworking contract separate to the Integra were new to this type of build, and they didn't feel in a place to be able to take the whole project on. So we let the groundworks contractor who built the foundations, and of course what happened was the units arrived on site and they didn't match because there was tolerances by legitimate tolerances, but you don't have them really, and it's much better if you can let the whole contract. So we would do that differently, and I think Integra now having had the experience, would be prepared to take it on. So I definitely would, and I'm pretty sure Tempo took the whole thing on. So yeah, we would do that differently. But the other challenge for us was that we had to get vesting certificates from Tempo, so we had to pay up front, which we're not used to doing. So we had to change our kind of cash flow arrangement, and that we would have to address that if we had grant into these projects going forward, because you need to forward fund it, because of course the manufacturer wants money upfront to be able to secure those bespoke units for you, if they are indeed bespoke, and we're not used to doing that, paying, and it's a substantial, it was 300,000, I think, up front, but we overcame it, and it's different. And then you've got fixed costs. I mean, what's there not to like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's a different mindset, isn't it, that you get the benefits out at the end of the system. There's a number of specific questions that are coming up in the chat now, so I'm going to sort of try and rattle through some of these, because I think they're all interesting, they're all relevant. So picking these up in no particular order, looking at maybe John, and then sort of from the architect perspective, what about heritage contexts, conservation areas where you've got complex urban environments where there might be quite tight rules around the typology of buildings? How can MMC in your experience speak positively into those environments? So Nigel, John, why don't you go first, then we'll let the architects comment on that from their experience.
So I did a lot of heritage work back in my early career, and certainly trying to use in city environments where you keep facade retentions, but behind that, it's retail, it's office space. There's there can be ways of tying things in. It's a quite specific area, but we want to look at all the brownfield and the sort of the sites that could be used. But again, how do you complement the heritage, and we want to retain conservation. That's a key part of it. I think that would be a good challenge to take on, actually, having not had that sort of challenge so far, but knowing how we used to address it, it would be, bring it on. The units, we made them small enough and adaptable and joinable so that they can be brought into tight spaces. So I'd welcome that challenge for sure.
Mm. And what about Nigel and Heather?
I would just go back to my point that MMC is a broad church. So, it is, we're obviously talking today about two samples that happen to be volumetric, shall we call them, but that's just because those are examples that have landed. But there is a project on Park Street in Bristol by a developer called Urban Creations, who did exactly as John has done. They've retained the facade, and then they put modular units behind that for student accommodation again. And so there are ways around it. It's going back to that point that Heather and I made about, there are any number of challenges that you need to address in a project. The context is what is if you're building in a historic context, that's one of those challenges, and it will inform your choices of MMC if that's the route you go down.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Heather?
Well, I suppose even just looking at the Inns Court scheme, in terms of we had influence over what the roof was like and the materials and the window sizes. So there's no reason why that couldn't be developed for a different location if there were specific proportions you were trying to work with, or roof types. Again, you're wanting standardization. I think on a big scheme there's a real opportunities, because you'd get that kind of efficiency of repetition and duplication from doing that. But I suppose the potential challenge is if you're developing a lot more up front, how quickly you could maybe engage kind of conservation officers and planners in that process to try and refine that design in a heritage concept sooner, so that you're not kind of developing, getting quite far down your design before you're submitting to planning, and then obviously having to unpick all the work that you've done. So I think that's maybe where potential changes in the planning process as well might feed in.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We're looking at one project which is on next to an old church, and it's part of the curtilage of that building. And one of the MMC solutions is even looking at how we might use sort of the slate, the slate dust to compact that's wasted from the slate mining, and then use that for a facade. So I think again, what we recognise is that, Nigel's point, it is a broad church. There's lots of different solutions. There's lots of different design. And I suppose I was reflecting a little bit on the conversation about the standardization. I was speaking to an architect not long ago who made an interesting analogy, which I've sort of taken to heart really. He said about, with an Apple product or a really beautifully designed products, actually the rules of standardization give you the parameters of which you do your good design in. Doesn't mean that it's because you're thinking about the user experience, you're thinking about the ability to what's its purpose. And I just thought it was really helpful about MMC. It's not about ripping away good design or ripping away concepts of beauty, but it's giving, as Nigel, I think you alluded to, this idea. Of course, there's always a context in which you play with those rules. So I think that's been a helpful analogy for me to hold on to thinking about MMC. There's a couple more questions here, and I think this is, again, obviously we've talked a lot about how does MMC drive that sustainability agenda. Sally, Nigel, would you like to speak about what the energy solution was for LaunchPad? And then John, Heather, would you like to comment on the energy solution that you're looking at for Tempo?
LaunchPad had some, in terms of U values, air tightness, all those things, LaunchPad was good because you could control and you could set all of those through the factory. So that was fine. The challenge with LaunchPad was, as Sally mentioned, was the 10-year lease. And that had some real challenges on things like renewables and the amount of renewables, how those work. We did in the end put a photovoltaic array on the building, but that was, dare I say it, Sally, a pragmatic choice to get through planning as much as, it clearly has some benefit in terms of carbon, but in terms of payback, 10 years is pretty tight for a small installation on a temporary building. But the technology is proven and stuff, so it's it works from all those aspects. It would have been better for a longer payback to be allowed, really.
Yeah, and of course, interestingly, that thinking about that energy poverty agenda by driving that really good sort of thermal bridging and the rest of it, you are sort of. It may not be able to answer all those questions for 10 years, but it answers a lot of the questions, and the technology drives those further solutions. So what about Heather, John, comments on what we're hoping to do with Tempo?
I'll look in. We always look at the marginal cost of adding renewables. So you've got to put a roof on anyway. So what's the marginal cost of making that a generating roof? We worked out we could probably put PV on half the roof and have enough energy to cover all the regulated emissions around heating and hot water and pumps and fans. So we found the most heat efficient or energy efficient heat pump on the market, and it's also quiet, the quietest on the market, so that it won't affect the neighbours. And then you're talking about £250 a year for sort of keeping the place warm and hot water and all the regulated emissions, and then you've got half a chance of doing that. So you would look to eliminate fuel poverty, both on the efficiency and what you do with the renewable energy. So we reckon we could go up to 4 stories with using that sort of roof system and get the building as a net zero offering.
Brilliant.
I think just to say, kind of obviously we started with a very fabric first approach, so kind of maximizing insulation, orientation, using that as a starting point. And then the other thing to consider was how to improve biodiversity on the site. So, we did have the advantage that it's a brownfield site. It's kind of a former row of shops, so you've got a great starting point for improving biodiversity. But I think that's why, thinking about kind of native planting, creating a park for local residents, planting trees, all of that kind of fed into the wider aspiration for the scheme as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose that's the other piece of this, isn't it? We talk about the climate emergency, but there's also the ecological emergency. And of course, these two are directly correlating together, and how we drive that narrative. And for Bristol, it's declared its own climate emergency. It's declared its own intention with zero carbon goals by 2030. So of course, it's difficult, Sally, as you alluded on retrofit, we have to be doing it on new build. It's almost inexcusable, isn't it? And so although we're waiting for, as John, you alluded to, new Part Ls, the reality is that if we wait for national government to always get their all their ducks in a row, we're going to miss it. So again, the sort of moral urgency and imperative is very, very real. There's one more question. Forgive me. I'm hoping that people can stay around for a little bit of networking as well. We think that's an important opportunity just to connect with other people in this space. But I do want to just take this question because this always comes up on MMC. How in the world do these buildings get charged? How in terms of the ability for social housing partners to really work with MMC. Sally, could you just speak into that? I think would be helpful, and then I might take what we're doing with Tempo. It's a bit different, I think.
Yeah, sure. We have moved on since LaunchPad. As I said, nobody was interested in charging them. They were all very twitchy about it. We borrow money from many of the traditional banks, but also people like Triodos, who are sort of in principle up for it because they're Europeans and they have these modern methods of construction been going on for quite a while. But when the chips were down, nobody would do it. But that's also partly because we only have this 10-year lease. Now, the council are open to longer leases, and we are looking at a 60-year lease with them on the next site. And a couple of the banks, actually, one of the more traditional banks have indicated that they would talk to us as long as we can get this 60-year lease, and they would enable us to use our development finance and charge them. Maybe not at the full amount, but if we on shared ownership, we don't get the full amount, so we could live with that. So we have moved on leaps and bounds since LaunchPad, which is really positive. And that means that this is a real solution. And in MMC generally, as long as they're BOPAS accredited, which I think everybody is these days, and we get the warranties, 60 years is ample. And most of those manufacturers come with that. So yeah, that's not going to be a preventative in us moving forward with bigger and more schemes.
Brilliant. Yeah, and I think just from Tempo's perspective, they are going to be looking to be purchased by the HRH. That's the council's own delivery company. But so there's a different challenge there because they can borrow from different sources. But I think what we're seeing again, if you look across the MMC, broad church, we're seeing that more and more of these suppliers are coming both with that accreditation, as Sally, you referred to, BOPAS or NHBC accepts or whatever. They've got that warranty. And we're seeing these houses come for market sale to be fully mortgageable. So,
the council through grant, the council and Homes England are both saying, we'll give you more money for MMC. We want MMC initiatives. So, particularly Homes England, who are obviously a government body, if the banks don't like to be outdone by the government. So if we're getting those. They're pressing us to do more and more, and we can only do it with the support of the banks and the institutions. Plus, don't forget that the big hedge funds have got massive social investment funds now, which we're starting to use. I think they've all you're getting the sense that actually affordable housing is a really good investment. It won't ever go away. We've still got 16,000 people on the waiting list just in Bristol. So, they can guarantee their income stream, and that's what they want. So, and it's a great return for them. So, even if the banks don't do it, I think the hedge funds and the pension funds will. So.
Yeah. And I think the point there as well, isn't it, is that wherever you are in your MMC journey is to recognise that this tide is coming, that I don't think we're going to see it just disappear, not least, as Sally said, Homes England are now for their strategic partners requiring 25% of their delivery to be through MMC. So we've got, the institutions, if you like, of finance and mortgages coming behind this now. So again, the whole point of these sessions really is to say, look, get involved, understand, and see what's coming. Now, I'm going to come back to the panel before we go to breakout rooms to give us their one closing piece of advice about how to engage and sort of start to go on your MMC journey. And as I give them 1 minute to think about that, I'm just going to plug again. We put in the chat here some other events that you're very welcome to come to. We're going to have different panels looking at different elements of MMC. We also put up in the chat a lessons learned link to specifically on LaunchPad. We will hope to do one as well for Tempo when it's built, but this is looking at the whole design journey, what we went through, speaking to Nigel and Sally and the team, speaking to the council, trying to look at all the different constituent parts of how they engaged. And again, just a plug, please do, if you can, come along to that event on 10th of February, Ashton Court at 4 p.m. The link's up in there, and there's a link through to the Eventbrite to book your places there. It would be remiss of me not to thank our panel before we go to breakout rooms as well, just to thank Sally, to thank Nigel, to thank Heather, and thank John. Thank you so much. Your experience is invaluable, actually, because it's the people that are doing it, going ahead, building that journey, and then being prepared to share actually the highs and the lows of how we innovate and learn together. And in closing this part of the session, then, can I come one by one? What would be your recommendation to people that haven't yet had the experience or just started to dip their toe into MMC? What would your recommendation be? Sally, first to you.
Well, this is in my nature, but I would say go for it. It's not as scary as it might seem. And if you've got people like Nigel who can make them look great, and Heather and the architects out, all of you, you can really have good fun with it, I think. And it's it's worth the risk.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. And then to Nigel, who might have frozen. So we'll come back to Nigel. Nigel, give me a wave when you're moving, as it were. Heather, what would your recommendation be?
Well, speak to Bristol Housing Festival. I think you guys have been great in kind of charging the way ahead, but also speak to modular providers. They've been building up this experience, and if you're in the start of the journey as we were, it's just been great working alongside a modular provider to get to know their experience of the industry and to work alongside.
Brilliant. Thank you, Heather. And thanks for the work you're doing as well with the council at the moment. And Nigel, are you there? I can not see you, but I'm hoping I can hear you. No, microphone issues again. And John, we'll finish perhaps with you then. What would your recommendation be?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the dawn of MMC, and there's been many dawns, but I think there's so many pressures now to improve on quality, the zero carbon agenda, the homeless. There's so many good reasons to do it, and I think we've got to the point where we can really demonstrate the quality and speak to people who've done it and had a good story, like Sally and Nigel, because it takes the fear away.
Yeah, brilliant. And Nigel, I think I might have heard you back. Are you back there, Nigel? No, sadly not. Nigel, I hope we're going to miss that wisdom. Maybe if you share it with us, we'll pass it on. So thank you again to our panelists, and please do stay connected. And there's a public consultation at the moment going on with Inscourt. So again, you can see what's happening as that scheme goes through its process. And again, the lessons learned for the other LaunchPad scheme we've shared, and that's on the website as well. So again, if you want to understand more about that journey, and hopefully as the Bristol Housing Festival, we can bring these journeys back to you as well.